A room full of wealthy guests would rather stand than share a table with the most feared billionaire in Illinois. But when she publicly humiliated the black single dad sitting beside her, she had no idea he would become the only person willing to save her life just minutes later. What happened after that dinner would expose a secret worth millions and force everyone in that room to decide whether character is measured by power or by the courage to do what's right when no one else will. By 7:30, the ballroom at the Briarwood Hotel was glowing with crystal light, polished silver, and the careful smiles of people who wanted to be seen supporting hungry children. One table, however, remained half empty. At its center sat Celeste Arden, 52, owner of the largest cold storage and food transportation network in Illinois. Her name was printed across the evening's donor wall in letters nearly as large as the event title. Guests approached her table, noticed the sharp set of her mouth, then suddenly remembered someone they needed to speak with across the room. "The salmon is dry," Celeste told a young server without lowering her voice, "and this glass has fingerprints." The glass was spotless. An older waitress named Marlene stepped forward with a folded cloth. Her silver hair had begun slipping loose near one ear. "Ma'am, I just polished it, but I'll—" "Then do it again." Marlene wiped the same clean circle while Celeste watched. Across the room, Darius Cole adjusted the cuff of a dark blue suit that had been tailored for someone broader 20 years earlier. At 39, he carried himself with the quiet steadiness of a man accustomed to being overlooked until something stopped working. He checked the invitation in his pocket once more. Beside it rested a small orange metal tin, its paint chipped at the corners. His thumb brushed the lid, then moved away. A volunteer led him toward the empty chair beside Celeste. "This seat is reserved," Celeste said before he could sit. Darius glanced at the place card. "It has my daughter's name on it." Celeste looked him over, from his worn shoes to the faint grease stain near one cuff. "Staff seating is behind the service doors." "I'm not staff tonight." Her eyes hardened. Someone made a mistake. The event coordinator hurried over, already apologizing. "Mr. Cole is here representing Roosevelt Elementary." At the school's name, something changed in Celeste's face. "Roosevelt?" she snapped. "Why is that school involved in this program?" The coordinator froze. Celeste turned back to Darius. "Remove him." A few nearby conversations died instantly. Darius did not raise his voice. He simply placed the invitation on the table. Naomi Cole's name was written across the front in careful gold ink. "My daughter earned this seat," he said. "I'm sitting in it." Celeste leaned closer. "Do you know who you're speaking to?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then stand up." Darius held her gaze. "No one gets to make another person feel small just so they can feel bigger." The ballroom went silent. Marlene stopped wiping the glass. The coordinator stared at the floor. Even the musicians near the stage seemed to miss a note. Celeste drew in a breath, ready to answer. Then Darius noticed her hand beneath the tablecloth. It was trembling badly. For a brief moment, everything else in the ballroom disappeared. The whispered conversations, the crystal chandeliers, the orchestra softly filling the silence. He had seen that kind of tremor before, and it was not caused by anger. Celeste straightened her shoulders as if willing her body to obey. Her expression remained cold, but the glass of water beside her quivered when she reached for it. "I'm waiting," she said. Darius didn't answer. Instead, he quietly pulled his chair back. "I think you should sit down for a minute." A faint scoff escaped her lips. "I don't take health advice from strangers." Before he could reply, the event coordinator rushed between them, eager to smooth over the uncomfortable scene. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced into the microphone with forced enthusiasm, "before dinner continues, we'd like to recognize one of tonight's student guests from Roosevelt Elementary." The spotlight shifted away from the table. Naomi Cole stood near the stage, smoothing the wrinkles from her simple blue dress. She looked toward her father, found his reassuring smile, and finally walked forward. She wasn't nervous about speaking. She was worried about embarrassing him. "My name is Naomi," she began. "I built a temperature sensor for our school's cafeteria freezer." Several guests smiled politely. My dad helped me understand how refrigeration systems work. Sometimes food can look perfectly fine, even when it isn't safe anymore. Darius watched quietly from his seat. 5 years earlier, after Tessa passed away, he had promised himself Naomi would never grow up believing that tragedy had stolen her future. Every evening, after his overnight maintenance shifts, he sat beside her at the kitchen table, teaching her how wires carried signals, how compressors breathed life into cooling systems, and why every machine deserved someone willing to understand it instead of replacing it. The applause faded as Naomi stepped off the stage carrying a small certificate. She hurried straight back to her father. "We did okay," she whispered. "You did better than okay. I talked too fast. You talked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing." Her shoulders relaxed. No one in the ballroom noticed the relief in Darius's eyes. Working nights for South Harbor Public Schools barely covered rent. Old hospital bills from Tessa's final months still arrived every few weeks, and the electric company had mailed another overdue notice only yesterday. Whenever another school's freezer broke down, Darius usually stayed after his shift to repair it, even when nobody approved overtime. Children shouldn't lose breakfast because a compressor failed. He never told Naomi how many of those repairs were unpaid. Inside his jacket pocket rested the small orange metal tin. Most people assumed it held mints. It didn't. The lid had been scratched by years of use, but Darius still carried it everywhere because it had once belonged to Tessa. She had kept glucose tablets inside after being diagnosed years before. He had never found the heart to throw it away. As father and daughter returned to their table, Darius's eyes drifted toward a display board celebrating the evening's sponsors. A photograph of Roosevelt Elementary flashed across the screen. Across the room, Celeste's jaw tightened, only for an instant, but Darius noticed. Whatever history she had with Roosevelt, it wasn't forgotten. Then came the sound of shattering glass. Celeste's water slipped from her hand and crashed onto the ballroom floor. The room froze. For one awkward second, several guests assumed she had simply lost her temper. A few quietly stepped away from the table, careful not to become the next target of her sharp tongue. "Call her driver," one executive whispered. "Maybe she's had too much wine." Her assistant grabbed a phone with shaking hands. "Get the car around, right now." No one moved closer. Celeste reached for the edge of the table, trying to steady herself. Her breathing became shallow, and the confidence that had filled the ballroom only moments before was fading behind unfocused eyes. Darius didn't hesitate. He stepped around the broken glass and knelt beside her chair. "Ms. Arden," he said calmly, "are you diabetic?" She blinked, confused. I said, "Leave me alone." He had heard those words before. 5 years earlier, Tessa had whispered the same thing after her blood sugar crashed in the grocery store parking lot. She had hated needing help almost as much as she hated worrying Naomi. Darius recognized every sign. The trembling hands, the pale skin, the delayed speech. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the worn orange metal tin. Its paint had faded long ago, but he still carried it every day. Inside were glucose tablets, the same kind Tessa had always kept within reach. "Please," he said quietly, "take one." Celeste looked at the small tablet in his hand as if it were an insult. "I don't—" Her sentence dissolved before she could finish it. Darius turned to a nearby server. "Orange juice, as fast as you can." The young man sprinted toward the kitchen. Guests watched from a distance, uncertain whether to interfere. Her assistant stood frozen. "What do I do?" she asked. "Stay with her," Darius answered without looking up. "Keep talking to her. Don't let her lose focus." He placed a glucose tablet gently into Celeste's hand. For the first time that evening, she stopped fighting him. A minute later, the juice arrived. Another followed. The ballroom remained silent except for quiet voices and hurried footsteps as paramedics entered through the side doors. One medic checked her blood sugar. "It dropped pretty hard," he said. "Who gave her glucose?" He looked toward Darius. "You probably prevented this from getting much worse." The words echoed through the ballroom. People slowly realized what had happened. The man she had tried to throw out had been the only person who recognized she was in medical trouble. Celeste sat quietly while the paramedics finished examining her. Color gradually returned to her face. She glanced at Darius. For the first time since they met, she had nothing to say. There was no apology, no thank you. Only a look she couldn't quite hide, a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. Darius simply closed the orange tin, slipped it back into his pocket, and walked toward Naomi. "You okay?" she asked softly. He smiled. "I'm fine." "What about her?" "I hope she will be." He picked up his daughter's small coat as the evening finally resumed. He wasn't waiting for gratitude. Some acts of kindness were finished the moment they were given. As father and daughter crossed the hotel lobby toward the exit, Darius glanced through the open loading doors leading to the service dock. A refrigerated truck bearing the Arden Fresh logo had just arrived. One of the company's senior operations managers quietly climbed inside. Darius watched the man remove a digital temperature tag from a pallet marked for Roosevelt Elementary and slip it into his coat pocket before signaling the driver to close the trailer. The entire exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. But it didn't feel like an accident. Something about it stayed with Darius all the way home. By 5:30 the next morning, he was already walking through the service entrance of Roosevelt Elementary. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and fresh coffee, but something else lingered in the air, a sour odor that didn't belong in a school kitchen. Rosa Alvarez was waiting beside the cafeteria freezer with her arms folded tightly across her chest. "I was hoping you'd get here before district maintenance," she said. "Come look at this." The moment Darius opened the freezer door, warm air rolled toward him. Rows of milk cartons had already begun to swell. Boxes of yogurt were soft to the touch, and several trays of chicken had to be pulled immediately. Rosa let out a weary sigh. "That's breakfast for almost 400 kids." Darius crouched beside the compressor housing. The unit had been installed less than a year earlier. At least, that was what the paperwork claimed. He removed the side panel. His expression changed. "This doesn't make sense." "What is it?" Rosa asked. He ran his fingers across the compressor casing. "The paint's new." "So?" "The compressor isn't." He pointed toward the manufacturer plate beneath the fresh coat of gray paint. "The serial number says this unit is over 12 years old." Rosa stared at him. "They build the district for a brand new system." Darius nodded slowly. "And someone wanted it to look new." Within minutes, he had the unit running again, but the food was already unsafe. Workers began loading spoiled cartons into trash bins. Children arriving for breakfast looked through the cafeteria doors with confused faces. One little boy asked quietly, "Are we still eating today?" Rosa forced a smile. "We'll figure something out." She waited until the students had walked away before speaking again. "This is the third time in 2 months." "The same freezer?" She nodded. "Every report gets changed before it reaches the district office." "What do they write?" "Operator error. They always say someone left the door open." Darius looked back at the machine. No one left this door open. Just then, Naomi hurried in, carrying her backpack and a small plastic case. "I brought the sensor logs." She connected her homemade temperature monitor to a tablet. A graph appeared across the screen. "The temperature climbs every night around 2:15, she said. "Then the monitoring signal disappears for exactly 12 minutes. Darius leaned closer. "The alarm shuts off first." Naomi nodded. "Every single time." Someone wasn't just ignoring the failures. Someone was hiding them. Before lunch, Darius submitted his inspection report to the district facilities supervisor. The man barely glanced at the photographs. "You've done your job," he said. "Leave the rest alone." "These aren't new compressors." "I said leave it. They're putting children at risk." The supervisor lowered his voice. "Arden Fresh Logistics funds half the district's food program. So if you keep digging, don't expect to be wearing this maintenance badge much longer." Darius slipped the report back into his folder without another word. Threats had never fixed a broken machine. Neither had pretending nothing was wrong. Late that afternoon, as he finished replacing a damaged thermostat, his phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes." "This is the executive office of Ms. Celeste Arden." He remained silent. "Ms. Arden would like to meet with you personally." "When?" "As soon as possible." Darius looked through the cafeteria window toward Naomi, who was helping Rosa clean the breakfast tables after school. Then he looked back at the old compressor that had nearly ruined another day's meals. I'll be there. He had no idea whether the meeting would bring answers or another test. The headquarters of Arden Fresh Logistics rose above downtown Chicago like a wall of glass and steel, reflecting a sky the color of cold aluminum. Darius paused only long enough to straighten the collar of his old suit before stepping through the revolving doors. The receptionist smiled politely. "Mr. Cole, Ms. Arden is expecting you." She led him to the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked miles of warehouses, highways, and refrigerated trailers bearing the Arden Fresh logo. Celeste Arden stood beside the window with her hands folded behind her back. She looked stronger than she had at the fundraiser, calm, composed, as if the frightening moment in the ballroom had never happened. Another man stood beside the conference table. "I'm Owen Price," he said, extending a hand. "Chief Operations Officer." His smile arrived quickly. It disappeared just as quickly. "Mr. Cole," Celeste began, "thank you for coming." "You said you wanted to talk." "I do." She gestured toward the chair opposite her. "I understand you've raised concerns about equipment at Roosevelt Elementary." "I've raised concerns about children's food." A faint silence settled over the room. Owen slid a leather folder across the polished table. "We appreciate dedicated people," he said, "especially those willing to help us improve." Darius opened the folder. Inside was a consulting agreement. The compensation listed at the bottom was more money than he earned in nearly 2 years. It would erase the hospital debt, pay every overdue utility bill, replace Naomi's aging laptop, maybe even allow them to move into a better apartment. Owen watched him carefully. "You've earned a little security." Darius closed the folder. "I didn't come here looking for security. No, I came because schools are receiving equipment that isn't what they paid for." Owen leaned back. "That's a serious accusation. It's a serious problem." Celeste studied him quietly. "You never spoke to the media about what happened at the fundraiser." "No." "You could have." "I wasn't interested." "Why?" Darius looked directly at her. "Because helping someone shouldn't become a headline." For the first time, Celeste lowered her eyes, only for a second. Then Darius reached into his canvas tool bag. He placed a worn compressor component onto the conference table. Gray paint flaked away where he'd cleaned one corner. "The district paid for new equipment." He pointed toward the stamped serial number beneath the fresh paint. "This part is over 12 years old," Owen answered before Celeste could even lean forward. "That must have come from a subcontractor." His response came too quickly, too confidently. Darius slowly turned toward him. "You recognize the serial series?" Owen frowned. "I've worked in this industry a long time." "You identified the production batch before I read the number." The room grew still. Celeste's eyes shifted from Darius to Owen. Neither man spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'll authorize an inspection of Warehouse 14. Owen's expression tightened, almost invisibly. "If that's what you want," he replied. The meeting ended minutes later. As Darius walked toward the elevators, he glanced back through the glass wall. Owen had already taken out his phone. His voice was too low to hear, but Darius clearly saw the message appear on the screen before it disappeared. "Move every file out of Warehouse 14 before midnight." The elevator doors closed. Whatever was hidden inside that warehouse, someone was already trying to make sure it would never be found. The thought stayed with Darius through the evening drive home. His apartment sat beside an elevated freight line in South Harbor, where passing trains rattled the windows often enough that Naomi no longer looked up when they passed. The building was old, but it was clean, and every broken hinge, loose cabinet door, and flickering light inside had been repaired by Darius himself. He unlocked the door to find Naomi sitting quietly at the kitchen table. She wasn't doing homework. An envelope lay open beside her, the electric bill. A bright red notice was clipped to the front. Final reminder. Before service interruption. Darius stopped in the doorway. "I was going to explain." Naomi folded her arms. "When?" "After I figured it out. You always say we're a team." "We are?" Then why do you keep acting like you're the only one on it? Her voice never rose. That somehow made it hurt more. Darius set his tool bag on the floor and pulled out a chair. I didn't want you worrying. Naomi looked down at the table. I'm already worrying. Silence settled between them. Outside, another freight train rolled past, its distant horn echoing through the neighborhood. I know you've been taking extra shifts, Naomi said quietly. Mrs. Alvarez told me she saw your truck at Jefferson School on Saturday. I was fixing their freezer. For free. They needed it. You needed to sleep. Darius managed a tired smile. Machines don't wait. No, Naomi answered softly. But dads shouldn't break either. The words landed harder than any accusation. He rubbed his hands together, still carrying the faint smell of compressor oil. When your mom got sick, he began, I promised myself I'd never let you feel like your dreams cost this family too much. Naomi's eyes filled, but she didn't interrupt. So when things get hard, I keep them to myself. You think I'm afraid of being poor? He looked at her. I'm afraid you'll stop believing you can build things. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I don't need everything to be perfect. I know. I just need you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Naomi stood and walked to her backpack. I found something. She pulled out her tablet and opened the temperature logs from Roosevelt's sensor network. I kept comparing the nights when the freezer failed. Colored lines filled the screen. There. She pointed to a tiny spike that repeated every time. The monitoring system loses contact with the freezer. Darius nodded. For 12 minutes. But look where the signal reconnects. She enlarged the map. The data routed briefly through another location before returning to the school server. A location labeled only by its distribution code. Warehouse 14. Darius stared at the screen. Someone wasn't simply shutting off alarms. Someone was controlling them remotely. He copied the data onto a flash drive and slipped it into his pocket. I'm proud of you, he said. Naomi smiled for the first time that evening. I'm proud of us. Later, after she had gone to bed, Darius stood on the tiny front porch, listening to the wind move through the empty rail yard. A black SUV sat beneath the only working streetlight. Its engine idled without moving. The windows were too dark to see inside. Darius took one step toward the curb. The headlights came on instantly. Without a sound, the SUV pulled away into the night. He watched until the taillights disappeared. Someone else knew he was getting closer, and they wanted him to know it. By the following afternoon, the weather forecast had turned grim. A winter storm was racing across northern Illinois, carrying the kind of heavy snow that shut down highways, grounded deliveries, and left entire towns waiting for power crews. Darius had barely finished replacing a faulty condenser fan at Jefferson Elementary when his phone rang. It was Rosa. Darius, she said, struggling to stay calm, I need your help. What happened? My nephew Miguel is driving one of the overnight supply trucks. Darius listened without interrupting. They rerouted him to Warehouse 14 because of the storm. He just called me. Her voice cracked. The backup power failed. The loading doors won't open, and there's insulin in one of the refrigerated trailers that's supposed to reach Mercy Hospital before sunrise. Darius's heart sank. And the food shipment? Nearly 3,000 school breakfasts. Snow was already falling hard outside. I've called everyone, Rosa continued. Nobody can reach the warehouse manager. Darius looked through the windshield at the thickening curtain of white. I'll go. You don't even work for Arden Fresh. I know. They could accuse you of trespassing. If those refrigeration units stay down much longer, those kids lose their meals and patients lose their medicine. He ended the call and turned the truck toward the interstate. The drive was painfully slow. Snow buried lane markers. Abandoned cars lined the shoulders. When he finally reached Warehouse 14, emergency lights flashed through the storm, but the facility itself sat almost completely dark. Miguel met him at a side entrance, wrapped in a reflective jacket. The generators quit 20 minutes ago, he said. Everything's shutting down. Inside, the warehouse echoed with alarms that had already begun fading one by one. The air was growing warmer. Darius grabbed his flashlight and headed straight for the mechanical room. The emergency generator wasn't destroyed. It had simply been disconnected. He frowned. No storm did this. Using tools from his truck, He traced the wiring until he found a heavy power cable hanging loose. The retaining bolts had been deliberately removed. Someone had wanted the backup system to fail. Miguel held the flashlight while Darius reconnected the line. Can it still run? It will if we're lucky. He reset the breaker. Nothing happened. He tried again. The old diesel engine coughed once, twice, then thundered to life. One by one, refrigeration compressors roared back across the warehouse. Cold air began flowing through the storage aisles again. Miguel let out a long breath. You did it. Darius wasn't listening. His flashlight had landed on an open maintenance bay nearby. Several pallets held brand new refrigeration compressors, still wrapped in factory plastic. Across the aisle sat stacks of faded, heavily worn units identical to the ones he'd found inside Roosevelt Elementary. Someone had labeled the old equipment with fresh inventory tags. The new equipment carried shipping labels bound for commercial clients. The old equipment was marked for public schools. His stomach tightened. It wasn't carelessness. It was a system. Footsteps echoed behind him. Darius turned. Celeste Arden stood at the warehouse entrance, snow clinging to her dark coat as she took in the scene before her. The restarted compressors, the saved insulin, the frightened workers. And Darius, covered in grease, standing beside machinery that her own company had failed to protect. Before either of them could speak, red and blue lights flashed through the loading dock windows. Police cruisers pulled into the yard. An officer stepped inside. Mr. Darius Cole? Yes. We received a report of unlawful entry and theft of confidential company property. Every head in the warehouse turned. The officer walked toward Darius. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us. The warehouse fell silent, except for the steady hum of the refrigeration units Darius had just brought back to life. Miguel stepped forward immediately. Officer, he saved this place. He kept the insulin cold, another worker added. If he hadn't gotten the generators running, we'd have lost everything. The officer raised a hand politely. I'm not making conclusions. I'm responding to a report. Two detectives entered behind him. Owen Price followed only a few steps later, brushing snow from his expensive overcoat as though he had simply arrived for another business meeting. There he is, Owen said, pointing directly at Darius. That's the man I told you about. Celeste turned sharply. Owen. Our security system recorded an unauthorized entry, Owen continued, and confidential company data has disappeared. I was invited by no one, Darius answered calmly. I came because people were trapped and medicine was about to spoil. Owen shrugged. That's a touching story. One detective opened Darius's tool bag, wrenches, meters, replacement wiring. Then his hand stopped. What's this? He lifted a small, external hard drive sealed inside a clear evidence pouch. Darius frowned. I've never seen that before. It was in your bag, the detective replied. Miguel shook his head. That's impossible. We were together almost the whole time. Almost? Darius's mind replayed the last 20 minutes. The mechanical room. Restarting the generator. Workers rushing everywhere. Too many people moving in every direction. The detective looked at the label. Arden Fresh Internal Audit. Owen folded his arms. I believe that's the missing property. Celeste stared at the hard drive without saying a word. She had watched Darius risk everything to save the warehouse. She had seen him covered in grease, repairing equipment that belonged to her company instead of protecting himself. She knew exactly what kind of man stood before her. Yet around her, attorneys were already joining the video call from corporate headquarters. Board members demanded updates through her phone. The police waited. The cameras recorded everything. The officer spoke quietly. Ms. Arden, do you have any reason to object while we question Mr. Cole? For one long moment, she looked at Darius. He didn't plead. He didn't defend himself. He simply waited. Celeste lowered her eyes. No. The single word landed harder than the winter wind outside. The detective gently guided Darius toward the exit. We're not placing you under arrest at this time, he explained. We just need to ask some questions. Even so, department policy required temporary restraints during transport because of the reported theft. The cold metal cuffs clicked around Darius's wrists. Naomi had just reached the warehouse with Rosa. She froze the instant she saw her father. Dad! She ran toward him before Rosa caught her shoulders. "What are they doing?" Naomi cried. No one answered. Her eyes found Celeste. "You saw him save everyone." Tears filled Naomi's voice. "You know he didn't do this." Celeste opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the second time since meeting Darius, she chose the safety of silence over the risk of doing what she believed was right. An hour later, after detectives confirmed there was no evidence connecting Darius to the hard drive, the restraints were removed, and he was released without charges. Snow continued falling outside the station. Celeste was waiting beside her car. "I'm sorry this happened," she said quietly. Darius looked at her for a long moment. "You knew what kind of man I was." She lowered her head. "I wasn't certain." "You were." He glanced toward Naomi, who was standing beside Rosa. "I won't walk into another room that belongs to you if my dignity only matters when it's convenient." He opened the truck door and drove away. Celeste remained standing alone beneath the falling snow. Hours later, unable to sleep, she sat inside the warehouse security office reviewing every camera angle from that night. At exactly 8:47 p.m., one recording caught her attention. Owen Price entered the mechanical room. He walked directly to Darius's unattended tool bag, 11 minutes before the police arrived, and when he stepped back out, his hands were empty. Celeste replayed the security footage again, then again. The timestamp never changed. 8:47 p.m. Owen entered the mechanical room carrying nothing. Less than a minute later, he walked out with the same calm expression he always wore during board meetings. 11 minutes afterward, the police arrived and found the external hard drive inside Darius's tool bag. Her stomach tightened. She opened footage from another camera, then another. The deeper she searched, the more unsettling the pattern became. Maintenance logs vanished from the company server shortly after Owen's visits. Inventory records were edited late at night. Shipping manifests no longer matched warehouse scans. Warehouse 14 wasn't suffering from poor management. Someone had been managing the deception. By sunrise, Celeste had ordered an internal audit without informing Owen. The results arrived before noon. Millions of dollars worth of refrigeration equipment had quietly disappeared over several years. Brand new compressors, intended for underfunded school districts, had been rerouted to high-profit commercial contracts, while refurbished units were repainted, relabeled, and installed in public schools at full price. The fraud was enormous, but proving who had orchestrated it was another matter. Most of the digital records had already been erased. "Our evidence is circumstantial," the company's chief attorney warned. "Without original maintenance records, Owen will argue the subcontractors acted independently." Celeste stared through the conference room window. There has to be something. Across town, Rosa Alvarez was reorganizing decades of storage boxes beneath the Roosevelt cafeteria stage. She stopped suddenly. "Darius." He looked up from repairing another refrigeration sensor. "Come here." She pulled a weathered cardboard box onto a table. Inside were dozens of spiral notebooks, their covers stained with grease and dust. "I almost threw these away during renovations." Darius smiled faintly. "My old service logs. For years, every time he repaired a freezer without charging the school, he had written everything down by hand. Date, time, serial numbers, parts replaced, temperature readings, recommendations that were never funded. He never imagined anyone else would read them." Naomi hurried over with her tablet. "What if we compare these to my sensor data?" Within an hour, papers covered the cafeteria tables. Every handwritten entry lined up with the digital temperature records Naomi had collected over the past year. Every unexplained freezer failure matched the same 12-minute signal interruption. Every replaced compressor carried serial numbers proving the equipment had already exceeded its service life long before it arrived at Roosevelt. Naomi looked at the screen in disbelief. They switched the equipment before it ever reached the school. Darius slowly nodded, and the alarms were disabled from Warehouse 14. Rosa wiped away a tear. "You kept all this. I just wanted the next technician to know what had really happened." "No," Rosa said softly. "You wanted the children to have safe meals." At that moment, Celeste walked quietly into the cafeteria. There were no reporters, no security team, only a woman who suddenly understood why the evidence still existed. Not because auditors had done their jobs, not because executives had protected the truth, but because one exhausted father had spent years helping schools that couldn't afford to pay him and had cared enough to write everything down. She looked at the worn notebooks spread across the tables. Every page represented another evening Darius had chosen service over comfort. Every line of ink had become a witness that Owen could no longer erase. For the first time in many years, Celeste realized something no balance sheet had ever taught her. Integrity leaves records that corruption can never completely destroy. She took a slow breath. To expose the truth, she would have to do more than accuse Owen. She would have to admit that the system protecting him had been built under her own leadership. And that confession might cost her everything she had spent a lifetime building. The following afternoon, the Roosevelt Elementary cafeteria buzzed with its usual lunchtime noise. Children laughed over cartons of milk, volunteers refilled serving trays, and Rosa moved from table to table, making sure no one left hungry. The doors opened quietly. Heads turned. Celeste Arden walked in alone. No black SUV waited outside. No assistants followed behind her. No photographers hovered nearby. She carried nothing except a slim folder tucked beneath one arm. The room grew noticeably quieter. Rosa watched her approach, but said nothing. Darius was tightening the cover on a thermostat panel near the serving line when he noticed her. He slowly stood. Celeste stopped a few feet away. "I didn't come here to defend myself." No one interrupted. She looked around the cafeteria before speaking again. "I built a company that measured success by efficiency, profits, and growth. Somewhere along the way, I allowed those numbers to matter more than the people they were supposed to serve." Her voice remained steady, but it lacked the sharp confidence everyone remembered from the fundraiser. "I created policies that rewarded managers for cutting costs. I ignored warning signs because every quarterly report looked better than the one before it." She looked directly at Darius, "And when you stood in front of me, I assumed I already knew who you were." Silence lingered between them. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." She placed the folder on one of the cafeteria tables. "I'm asking you to help make sure this never happens again." Darius didn't touch it. "What's inside?" "The Independent Review Board has agreed to hear evidence from anyone involved." She slid the folder slightly closer. "The data belongs to you." He frowned. "To me?" "The sensor records, your maintenance logs, every photograph you've taken. My lawyers won't control the presentation. My company won't own the evidence. The board selected its own attorneys. You'll testify directly." Rosa looked at Celeste in surprise. "You'd give up control?" "I already had control." Celeste's answer came almost as a whisper. "That's how we ended up here." Darius remained silent. Trust wasn't rebuilt with a speech. Naomi walked over carrying her tablet. She looked first at Celeste, then at her father. "Dad," he turned, "if we don't tell the truth." She glanced around the cafeteria where children were eating the lunches he had spent years protecting. "Someone else could get hurt." Darius closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he looked at Celeste. "I'll testify." Relief briefly crossed her face. "But not for your company." "I know. I'll do it for the schools." "And for every family that trusted those meals were safe." Celeste nodded. "You have my word," Darius answered quietly. "Your word isn't what I need anymore." She accepted the remark without argument. As she turned to leave, her phone vibrated. A new email had arrived from Owen Price's attorney. The subject line contained only 7 words: "Evidence proving you approved every cost reduction." Attached were internal documents bearing her electronic signature. If Owen released them first, it would appear that she had known about the entire scheme from the beginning. She stopped walking. For the first time since deciding to tell the truth, she realized the next hearing would not simply determine Owen's future. It would decide whether anyone believed she deserved a second chance at all. The hearing was held in the auditorium of the South Harbor School District Administration Building. Every seat was filled long before it began. Teachers, cafeteria workers, parents, reporters, and warehouse employees sat side by side, waiting to hear how years of unanswered questions had finally reached this room. At one table sat Owen Price, flanked by 2 attorneys. At another sat Celeste Arden, alone. Darius arrived carrying a worn cardboard box. Naomi walked beside him, with her tablet tucked carefully under one arm. Rosa followed a few steps behind, holding the spiral notebooks that had spent years forgotten beneath the cafeteria stage. The chair of the Independent Review Board spoke first. This hearing concerns the safety of public school food storage and the management practices of Arden Fresh Logistics. Owen stood confidently. The company is searching for someone to blame, he said. I followed policies approved by Ms. Arden. If mistakes were made, they were corporate decisions, not criminal acts. He glanced toward Darius. And this maintenance technician has spent months spreading accusations after being denied a consulting contract. Murmurs spread through the room. Darius remained seated until the board invited him forward. He placed the old notebooks on the evidence table one by one. I never expected anyone outside a school cafeteria to read these. The board members opened the first notebook. Every page contained dates, serial numbers, handwritten diagrams, temperatures, repair notes, and recommendations stretching back years. Naomi connected her tablet to the projector. Colored graphs appeared across the large screen. These are the sensor records from Roosevelt Elementary, she explained calmly. Every freezer failure happened after the monitoring system was disconnected remotely for exactly 12 minutes. Darius pointed to one notebook. The serial numbers in these logs match compressors that should have been retired years earlier. Another board member compared them with the warehouse inventory recovered from Warehouse 14. They matched perfectly. The room fell silent. Owen's attorney stood. None of this proves Mr. Price created the scheme? No, Darius answered. It doesn't. He looked across the room toward Celeste. It proves something else. Everyone waited. Owen built a system that cheated schools. He paused. But that system survived because people were too afraid to question success. His eyes met Celeste's. A culture of fear doesn't begin with the people hiding the truth. It begins with the people who make honesty feel dangerous. No one moved. Darius continued quietly. I won't blame Ms. Arden for crimes she didn't commit. But I also won't pretend the warning signs weren't ignored. Every camera in the room turned toward Celeste. She slowly stood. My signature is on the cost control policies. Her voice never wavered. I rewarded lower expenses. I dismissed concerns that interrupted growth. I accepted reports without asking enough questions because the numbers looked good. She looked at the parents sitting in the audience. I did not order anyone to replace safe equipment with defective machinery. But I created an environment where speaking up carried more risk than staying silent. A tear rolled down Rosa's cheek. The room remained completely still. Celeste drew a slow breath. I accept responsibility for that failure. Her attorneys stared at her in disbelief. The admission changed everything. Without the protection of corporate denial, the recovered records, surveillance footage, maintenance logs, and altered shipping documents formed one complete timeline. The review board voted unanimously to refer Owen Price and his associates to the state prosecutor for criminal investigation. Moments later, the board announced that Celeste would step down immediately from day-to-day control of Arden Fresh while the company underwent independent oversight. She had lost the authority she once protected above everything else. As the hearing ended, the chair of the board turned toward Darius. Mr. Cole, we would like to offer you the position of Director of Community Safety for the district's Refrigeration and Food Protection Program. The room applauded. Darius didn't answer. Not yet. Because he still had to decide whether this was a chance to serve or simply another way of paying him for everything he had already endured. The offer remained on Darius's kitchen table for 3 days. Naomi never asked him what he was going to do. She simply watched him read the contract every evening after dinner. Finally, she looked up from her homework. You're searching for what's missing. Darius smiled. You know me too well. He picked up the papers. The salary is generous. The benefits are better than I've ever had. So what's wrong? He turned to the final page. The job only matters if I can do it honestly. The following morning, Darius walked into the district office carrying a folder marked with handwritten notes. The review board expected him to sign immediately. Instead, he slid a revised agreement across the table. I'll accept one condition. The board chair adjusted his glasses. Go on. My office answers to the community, not to Arden Fresh. He continued calmly. I want the authority to inspect any refrigeration system serving public schools without prior approval. I want every inspection report released publicly. I want apprenticeship positions reserved for young adults from working-class neighborhoods who want to learn this trade. And if any company, no matter how large, violates safety standards, my office reports it without asking anyone's permission. The room was quiet for several moments. Then the board chair smiled. I believe that's exactly why we asked you. He signed, not because the title made him important, but because the responsibility gave him a way to protect families long after the headlines disappeared. Months passed. The apprenticeship program filled faster than anyone expected. Young technicians learned to rebuild refrigeration systems instead of replacing them unnecessarily. Every school cafeteria received modern monitoring equipment, including a new generation of temperature sensors designed with Naomi's help. The overdue notices stopped arriving at Darius's apartment. For the first time in years, he was home most evenings before sunset. One afternoon, Rosa organized a community lunch inside the newly renovated Roosevelt cafeteria. Fresh paint brightened the walls. Children laughed over warm meals. The refrigeration system hummed steadily in the background. This time, every compressor inside the building was exactly what the records claimed it was. Celeste Arden entered quietly. She no longer arrived with an entourage. After selling a large portion of her personal shares, she had established a restitution fund to replace every defective refrigeration unit supplied to public schools. The executives involved in the fraud were gone, and she now served only as a voting member of the company's board without the special authority she once guarded so fiercely. A cafeteria worker hurried toward her. Ms. Arden, we've prepared a private table for you. She looked across the room. Darius was sitting with Naomi. Rosa was laughing with two bus drivers. Maintenance workers, teachers, volunteers, and parents shared the same long tables. Celeste smiled gently. No, thank you. She carried her tray to the empty seat beside Rosa. No one stood. No one applauded. No one treated her like royalty. And for the first time in many years, no one quietly walked away either. As dessert was served, Naomi reached into her backpack. She placed the small orange metal tin in the center of the table. The chipped paint caught the afternoon sunlight. Celeste looked at it. Your mother's? Naomi nodded. Dad says kindness doesn't erase consequences. She smiled at her father. But it can give people the chance to choose who they become next. Darius looked around the table. Months earlier, people had been afraid to sit beside one woman. Now the seats were filled because everyone had chosen to stay. He had never been rewarded for enduring humiliation. He had been trusted because of years of quiet work, steady character, and the simple decision to keep doing what was right when no one was watching. Power had once emptied a table. Character had filled it again. And that was the kind of legacy no amount of money could ever buy. When Naomi placed her mother's little orange glucose tin in the middle of that cafeteria table, it wasn't just a memory of Tessa. It became a reminder that one quiet act of compassion had changed far more lives than anyone in that ballroom could have imagined. This story reminds us that real dignity isn't measured by what you own, but by how you choose to treat the person standing in front of you. Money can buy influence, but only character earns trust. And once trust is lost, only honest actions can begin to rebuild it. Today, think about one person you see every week but rarely truly notice. Give them the same respect Darius offered, even when he had every reason to walk away, because one small moment of grace may become the turning point in someone's life, including your own. If Darius's story touched your heart today, leave a 1 in the comments so I'll know you were here with us until the very end. And tell me this, if you had been in Darius's place, would you have helped Celeste after the way she treated you? I'd truly love to hear your answer. Until next time, take good care of yourself. Because the next story may remind you that the person everyone overlooks today could become the one no one ever forgets tomorrow.